welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am your host, Jessica, and I am here with author Bryan Gruley. You have quite a few books and series under your belt. You also have a Pulitzer Prize under your belt.
I shared in it, yes.
Yes.
Wasn't just me.
And you are here with a brand new series called BITTERFROST. First of all, crime novels are super, super popular. I love, it seems to be, I did a little research. You seem to have certain themes that you like running through your books. I like that there's a character in it that is a Zamboni driver. You've done that, correct?
I've never driven a Zamboni. I got a ride on one with a buddy of mine in Chicago who gave me some lessons in Zamboni, but I didn't get to drive.
You didn't get to drive. Okay.
They're expensive. They probably didn't want me to run it through the boards.
That would be a problem, wouldn't it?
Zambonis cost a lot of money. So yeah, that'd be a problem.
But yeah, you're obviously a hockey fan. Like that's something you
play.
You feel passionate about, and you bring everything to this story, which is it going to be the first in a series?
I'm working on a sequel, so I don't know what constitutes a series, Jessica, but we're going to have at least two.
Awesome. So
that's the plan.
Tell us a little bit about BITTERFROST and your characters and where the story came from for you.
Sure. So BITTERFROST is a fictional town. It would, if you're looking at the state of Michigan, the Mitten part of it, the Lower Peninsula, it would be in the far left-hand upper corner. So, somewhere between the Mackinac Bridge to the UP and Harbor Springs, which is a place rich people go. And I made it up. It looks like another Michigan town. It has a river that runs right from Lake Michigan right through the middle of town, and it's called the Jaco River, which is Finnish for division. And in a way, the town is divided because the people who own most of the north side of the river are the Payne family, and on the south side you have the Delaney's, and they butt heads in this book. But the book, it's about a guy named Jimmy Baker. Jimmy he's from BITTERFROST. He's a hockey player, very good hockey player. Ended up drafted into the NHL, went to the minors. He's big, he's strong, and he's got an edge for reasons that are alluded to in the book. And in the minors, he does quite a bit of fighting. And then one night, he almost kills somebody. He knows how bad he hurt the guy. He quits the game right there. And he goes back to his hometown. He loses his family. He loses his livelihood. And now, 13 years later, when the book opens, he is a Zamboni driver for the elite junior team in BITTERFROST, the Ice Kings. And one night, he ends up in a local bar where he goes once in a while for one drink. And there's a couple of knuckleheads in there from downstate, Detroit area. They're drunk. They're hassling the barmaid. That's a friend of Jimmy's. He tries to intervene. And a few hours later, he wakes up on his kitchen floor, covered with blood, doesn't remember much. And then the next day, one of those knuckleheads is found, beaten to death. And Jimmy is the natural suspect. And he doesn't really know. He knows he's capable of doing something like that, but he doesn't know if he did it. And really, what the book is about, there's three main characters, but Jimmy is the protagonist, and all three of them are seeking redemption for past. Jimmy's is the most dramatic, obviously. How do you go through life, Jessica, thinking you may have destroyed somebody else's life? And Jimmy wrestles with that every day. He says to himself, every day is a penance. He's trying to live a good, solitary as happy a life as he can, and then he ends up in this mess. He turns to his friend Devin Payne, one of the Payne family members. She's a lawyer and also a hockey player. And so she takes on his defense. And on the other side of the aisle in the prosecution is Garth Klimek, late 50s detective, veteran detective, kind of a curmudgeonly guy. And he's the one marshaling the evidence against Jimmy. And we're off.
Yeah, so I think it's you do bring up a very good point and a very good theme of people who realize that they're capable of horrible things, but don't want to, don't want to do the horrible thing. And
Right.
I think, it is really interesting when you're talking about a story when I like to say in a lot of the stories and in a lot of crime fiction, we talk about unreliable narrators, but like what I like
Right.
is that we're talking about somebody who already knows he might be an unreliable narrator, and he's
Yeah, that's
very,
a good
very
point.
much aware of that.
Yeah, Jimmy hopes he didn't do it. He doesn't remember doing it, but he knows, unfortunately, that he's capable of it. And everybody in town knows he's capable of it. So that's what he wrestles with. And it actually was inspired by an actual thing that happened in the National Hockey League more than 20 years ago. A guy named Todd Bertuzzi got into a fight with another guy, Steve Moore, and it got really nasty. You could find it on YouTube. And Moore, he suffered injuries that prevented him from ever playing again. Bertuzzi went through civil and criminal litigation hell, resumed his career and had a pretty good career, but was extremely remorseful and said he wished the day had never happened. And so I make no judgment of those two guys, especially Bertuzzi, but as a hockey player, I thought about it a lot and decided someday I'm going to write a story about this. And it goes back to the bigger question I raised. How do you cope with the idea that you might have ruined somebody's life?
So with Devin and Garth, what about them? Where did their characters begin for you? And how did they sort of seem like the natural bookends, sort of on the other
Well,
side, either side of Jimmy?
I wrote a book, a manuscript, I should say. It wasn't a book, never will be, before Bitterfrost, set in northern Michigan in a different place. And Devin Payne was one of the characters. She was a lawyer, but in a different capacity. So I brought Devin in knowing, okay, I'm going to have a bad thing happen. Going to need a defense lawyer. But then I invented Klimek as the counterpoint. He's older, he's kind of curmudgeonly, um, and Devin and Klimek had an encounter a year or two before. A really nasty murder happened in the Bitterfrost area. Devin uh, defended the accused murderer and in a really nasty murder, and she got him acquitted. So Klimek failed in a way. He looks back on that as a failure, but without giving any spoilers, Jessica, Devin failed as well. And so this is sitting between them. They both know this thing between them is sitting there, this thing that happened to the two of them 2 or 3 years. I can't remember. I think it was 6 years before. Um, and and so this case is one that both of them don't want to screw up. They really want to make it right. So that adds, I think it adds to the tension of the story.
Is it difficult as a writer to balance, you balance character, you balance court, making it feel like you're in the courtroom, you balance the suspense and the, the overall keeping everything going. Is it difficult to find that balance? Do you do a lot of plotting, do you find? And Were you ever finding at one point in this story with, the main characters that one of them was kind of walking away with the scenes in ways you weren't expecting?
Um, I wish I could do plotting. I can't do it. I have friends who plot out every single scene before they write anything.
Oh, don't say that. I think it's fascinating how everybody has a different type
Yeah,
of
I wish,
style. And some
because when
people,
I
yeah,
was a journalist for 40 some years,
yeah.
and when I was writing long form narratives, I knew how the story ended. And so in fact, as I was gathering information and interviewing people, et cetera, I would build these long, detailed chronologies, which were in effect outlines. So I had this sort of map to follow. Here, I'm just winging it. Um, I create, I decide something bad happened, and I create a couple of characters and give them names. And Jessica, I just have to put them on the page and let them do stuff. And of course, I'm mindful that one of them isn't too big a character so that it diminishes the others. But if I guess if you do it properly, and I'll let the readers judge whether I did, one character augments another character, augments the other character, goes around. They all play off of each other and make each other more interesting characters, or at least that's what I hope.
So then you kind of stumble along the plot
Yeah,
with them. You're figuring things out. I love it. I personally call that a discovery writer.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good word for it, because
Yeah.
I literally discover things, and the characters kind of taunt me with, no, I'm going to do this. And, characters can't take over, it's in your head. But I believe, and I don't know the physiology of this, but I believe your subconscious works. So while I'm sleeping, I'm having dinner with my wife, I'm playing hockey, I'm not thinking actively about story, but in my brain, it's working on it. And you go back to your typewriter and, well, my laptop, and you think you're going to go this way, and your subconscious now emerges and says, no, try this. And this sounds paradoxical, but it's sort of it takes a sort of discipline to trust yourself, because it is actually coming from you. And I'll follow that, and frequently it works. Um, I remember there was a scene in my very first book, Starvation Lake, where I had to have the protagonist go into a store, and he needed to talk to this cashier for like one little thing. And I thought, this is going to be 5 paragraphs. But then I decided, well, he's in line, he has to do something. And then there's somebody in front of him, and I have to make that come alive. And then all of a sudden, the woman at the cashier tells him, I own the pizzeria next door. Let's go over there and talk. And several pages later, I have this insight that profoundly changed the end of the novel. So it was a gift, but it's a gift I gave myself. I mean, I'm the one who's writing it. So, and that happened a few times in Bitterfrost.
So that was like pretty much my next question. So I mean, did you have a general idea where it was going? Did you have a general idea what was going to happen or what had happened? Or were you pretty much like, and I don't want to give anything away, but pretty
Yeah.
much like Jimmy, where you didn't know?
Well, I knew that I'm not giving anything away here, that there's this double murder. And I had an idea of what really happened. And I'm not saying Jimmy didn't do it. I'm just saying I know what really happened. But I didn't know how I was going to get there. And I didn't know what the courtroom scenes would go like. And there were all these little things that turn into big things. But for instance, Jimmy has a fixation with grammar. It drives him nuts that, for instance, this drives me nuts. This comes right from me, the guy in Catholic school who diagrams sentences. It drives him nuts that people use apostrophes to signify plurals, which Okay. And it drives Jimmy nuts. And at first it was just a personality quirk. And in the end, it turns out it's material to the story. And I didn't plan that. It just happens. Or at some point I go, well, here's this little ball I threw up in the air. Do I just get rid of it or do I use it? And I ended up using it. And it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I mean it sounds like fun, and I mean I think that that makes for a fun read, and it's always good. Again, I don't hold anything against, like, some of my favorite books the authors have told me are very deftly plotted, but I do love the idea of somebody who can sit down and they have this kernel of a story and they just hit the road running with the characters figuring things out. Was this one very different for you to write from any of your other books?
Well, they're all different, but in their way. My first three books were first person narratives. And then my last three, including Bitterfrost, are multiple points of view. So you shift between, in this case, three characters. And I think, I learned that I didn't really know how to do that. When I was a rookie, not that I'm all that much advanced, but when I had never written a novel, first person just came more naturally, you know. And then with Bleak Harbor, my fourth novel, I decided I want to try this because the nature of that plot it was a kidnapping of an autistic boy. It made it very difficult to just have one point of view. Which one do you do? And, if I went back, I could probably figure it out. But I enjoyed that. And in this case, I just thought it worked. And I had done it in that novel I wrote that's never going to be published. I had practice in that too, because there were three points of view in that. One of them was Devon. So I actually had an advantage in going in. I knew her. I had a good feel for her. And in fact, there's a chapter in Bitterfrost that's it's a backstory from some years before. And I wrote it in the book that will never be seen. But I went back and grabbed it and I did this and that to it, but it worked. I really like that scene. I love that scene. It's set in Detroit, that backstory scene.
Uh,
Downtown Detroit.
if we if we when we return to Bittercross, I shouldn't say if we when we return to Bitterfrost, who are we gonna see again? Who will the characters, like, will it center around Devon? Will they all show up at one point?
I was working on it just a couple hours ago, and I'm going to go back to it here shortly. There, all the characters. Well, the three main characters in Bitterfrost, Clemic, Jimmy, Devon, will all be in the next book, which is tentatively called River Deep. It's about a drowning of two kids, but Jimmy will not be a major character. He'll be there. Instead, it'll be Devon, Clemic, and two other characters. And so I'll have four to toggle around. And again, it's been fun. And going back to what you were just saying, if I'm surprised, the reader is likely to be surprised, as long as it's earned surprise. If you have flying werewolves all of a sudden appear to save the day, that's not earned. They'll be surprised, but not in a good way. So far, I haven't resorted to flying werewolves, although I've been tempted.
I mean, you could switch from small town crime stories
Yeah,
to fantasy horror,
yeah,
but
yeah, sure.
I don't see that in your future.
I admire those writers. I love Gabino Iglesias's books, but it's not. I part of the reason I admire them is I watch and go, I can't do that. I don't think I could do this. So I admire that.
I wanted to thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you. Thank you
I
for having me.
really appreciate, and I appreciate, talking a little bit just about the multiple points of view, because I find some people say that it's easier to write that way, and some say the opposite. Did you find it really difficult to switch?
Um, I don't recall it being that way. I mean, first person narrative has the limitation of you can that character you can only write what that character either knows or can see or observe. Like somebody asked me, do you know a lot about detective work and stuff? And I don't. But in my first three books, it was all funneled through. It was Gus, a journalist, watching detectives. So he wouldn't know exactly what they do. In this book, I don't have that limitation. But I have to be careful, as you alluded to earlier, to make these characters independent of each other, and at the same time that they complement each other in some fashion. And it was really fun. And then I have to look and say, oh, okay, it's not in Bitterfrost. It doesn't just go Devin, Jimmy, Klimek, Devin, Jimmy, Klimek. It kind of does, but there's a couple spots where Devin gets an extra chapter. When I first was writing it, I showed it to a friend of mine who's a professional editor, Jim Thompson. And he said, I don't think Jimmy can carry this book. You need to start with Devin. And then I tried that. And then I said, Jim, no, I'm going to go back. And he was a great guy. He gave me an enormous amount of help with this book. And I think in the end we agreed. But then I turn it in. Severn House takes, the UK publisher takes the book. And a month later, my editor says, maybe you should take chapter 6 and make it chapter 1. And in fact, that's what chapter 1 is now. When Jimmy wakes up on the floor, Jimmy wakes to a pinging sound in his head and the smell of blood. That was chapter 6 before. And, she told me this, and I thought, oh man, it's all his work, etc. But then in about 5 minutes, I realized she's absolutely right. It's going to draw the readers in, well, right away. And readers have told me, the few that have seen it already, that it's great. So I think Victoria Britton was correct.
I can't imagine this being the 6th chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, basically it started at chapter 2.
Huh.
With the scene where Devin gets into it with this other guy. And then we end up in chapter 6. Another buddy of mine read it back in that form, and he goes, Gruley, nothing happens until chapter 6. So I think that was an exaggeration, but he was sort of right. And I'm really glad Vic told me to do what she thought, and I think it works.
Thank you for chatting with us again. So do you usually work on one series at a time? Are you somebody who could do more than one? I mean, is the next Bitterfrost your current sole project, or do you have something else you're working on?
No, that's all. I retired from my day job. I don't need another day. I mean, I write every day, almost every day. I rarely miss a day, but I don't need the kind of pressure it would take to, be churning out books. I'm retired. We're fine. I like to play golf. I like to play hockey. I like to see my grandkids. We like to travel. I don't want to give up all that stuff so I can write a lot of books. And God bless the people who do, Some of those people need to do all that to pay the bills.
Without a
But
doubt.
I'm on Social Security, at least for now, until, who knows what's going to happen.
Well, thank you again. Check out Bitterfrost. It comes out on April Fool's Day.
That's right. No fooling.
No fooling.
No fooling.
No fooling. And Bryan Gruley, thank you for coming to Syosset Library virtually, and we are going to close this chapter.
Thank you.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.